Dr. Hal Needham, Hurricane Hal. Let's talk about Melissa and what's going on here. This is a very interesting system. Let's talk about characteristics of Melissa and what makes this an interesting storm. For one, it's been kind of a very slow moving system. And I saw in your discussion this morning, you made mention of the importance of just the strength, the slow movement, and then the water temperature at a depth. Can you kind of go through that and explain how that's being impactful?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we know that hurricanes need warm water to develop and strengthen, but typically when they stall or they move really slowly, hurricanes are just these amazing machines. They're just creating these chaotic oceans. If you've ever been in or near a hurricane on the ocean or on the coast, the waves are just chaotic. They're going everywhere. And in that chaos, a lot of cooler water usually upwells from underneath. I was amazed to see Melissa moving at 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, and strengthening. What that means is we have really high oceanic heat content, which means the ocean is not only warm at the surface, but very warm at depth because it's stirring up the ocean. It's bringing up cooler water from underneath, and the cooler water isn't cool. It's still strengthening. I was amazed by that.
Okay, very interesting. Something else that's been standing out to me is this track, this very strange track. And I guess that kind of comes with the slow movement too. But what's the reasoning for kind of this weird, wobbly, squiggly line of a track that we've seen?
Yeah, we think about upper air guidance, and really we see these hurricanes on satellite. They're so impressive, but there's a lot of invisible things happening in the upper atmosphere. And what hurricanes want to do is move south to north. They want to transfer that heat and energy from the tropics to the poles. But a lot of times we have prevailing pressure patterns out there. We hear about the Bermuda High, usually an area of high pressure that's out over the Atlantic. That tends to curve these storms more or make them track more from east to west. We look for a break in the ridge, and that means where there's a break in that ridge of high pressure, typically these storms will try to curve north. And we've been expecting the northward turn, but I've been really amazed to see it hasn't happened yet. It's been crawling to the west. And that's been really interesting forecast for Jamaica because in Jamaica, relatively small compared to the big ocean. And if it, doesn't make that turn to the north, soon enough, it would really change the impacts on the island. So we look at these prevailing pressure patterns with upper level guidance, and that's what we really use to determine where these storms will track. When it comes to turns, they don't turn on a dime, and we're usually, expecting a turn, but sometimes it happens earlier or later than we expect.
Okay, you mentioned impact on the islands. Let's talk about that, what that impact is going to be, regardless of what category we're talking at landfall here. Jamaica is going to certainly get the wind impacts. What kind of damage could we possibly be seeing as far as
Yeah, I
winds?
mean, this is just, it's been amazing to see. Melissa as a category 5 hurricane forecast from NHC said additional strengthening is possible. Also, in the discussions we could see a fluctuation in intensity. I was really, I won't say I was happy to see this, but I thought it was appropriate that the NHC mentioned even if this fluctuates from a Cat 5 to a Cat 4 back to a Cat 5, really the reason we have the category system is based on wind damage. And so Category 5 and Category 4 storms are both catastrophic wind damage. So whether it makes landfall as a 4 or a 5, it does not really matter, at least as far as the wind impacts. That type of wind impact would be catastrophic even to well-built buildings. We're talking about widespread roofs off and even collapse of walls. I mean, tremendous damage. Obviously, trees can be stripped. This is the worst damage we see from hurricanes, the Category 4s and Category 5s. Our concern is that we would see the core of this storm move across Jamaica with that intensity.
Yeah, certainly makes sense, especially you are the storm surge guy. So let's talk about that as well. Explain the difference here when we're talking islands like Jamaica and even Cuba versus like a US mainland when it comes to storm surge impacts.
Yeah, really. I'm glad you brought that up. We typically, we think a lot about this storm. What category is it? How big is it? But a big control on storm surge is the coastal profile and the coastal shape. Where we see a broad, open coastline like the U.S. Gulf Coast, we can see these storm surges spread for hundreds of miles. When we get to the islands of, say, the Caribbean or East Asia, storm surge tends to be a lot more localized. And so that's really what we'd expect here. The big concern is if the eye of the storm or the eye wall, those most intense winds around the hurricane, if that engages with any bays or harbors where it's pushing onshore wind, storm surge could funnel in incredibly quickly. In that case, In general, right now, National Hurricane Center has been forecasting 9 to 13 feet of storm surge, and that's dependent largely on the track. If the eye gets into a bay, it could be even for sure higher than that. But generally on the open coast, I think we'll see a lot of areas seeing maybe 6 to 10 feet of storm surge, which still would be catastrophic for those areas.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously the rainfall, especially when we're talking about terrain, with Jamaica and even Cuba and slow movement. Landslides, mudslides going to be like a huge major problem with this.
My biggest concern from the beginning was the rainfall and the landslides just because it's such a slow moving storm. It's going to take days to cross the area. And so it looks like they could see, in general, 15 to 30 inches of rain across a wide swath, but some localized maxima getting up to 40 inches of rain. I mean, that's tremendous. If you're using the metric system in the Caribbean, that's more than a meter of rain, a lot of rainfall. And on those steep mountain slopes, that can mean mudslides, that can mean landslides, and those can be pretty unpredictable. I've done work in field zones, for example, Hurricane Camille that hit the Gulf Coast in 1969 in the western part of the state of Virginia. It dumped a 30-inch rain bomb on the mountains. Wilson County, Virginia had over 6,000 landslides. We're talking back in 1969, but it's the same idea. Heavy rain getting into 25, 30, 35 inches of rain on steep mountain slopes. Those mountain slopes are going to give way. And that's a concern. It gets quite unpredictable where you have villages and towns below the mountains that could produce widespread damage and even fatalities.
You are the history guy. I know you go back in the archives a lot when it comes to hurricanes. Has Jamaica ever seen anything comparable to this?
This is up there. I mean, whenever you get a direct category, upper category 4 or cat 5 strike, it's hard to find comparables. I was looking in the archives this week, and, the hurricane of 1722 comes to mind in a way, at least as far as surge, the difference that hit southeastern part of Jamaica, right over by Kingston, and there's a large bay there where it just funneled in about 16 feet of storm surge. There was a community called Port Royal at the mouth of Kingston Harbor that was just very much destroyed by the storm surge. The good news with Melissa, it looks because it took time to make the northward turn, more likely that we'd see landfall probably in southwestern Jamaica or even south central. Probably the eye of the storm would not really engage with Kingston Harbor in that area that we saw in 1722. So that's good news, and just looking in general in the region, we've also seen a 9-foot storm surge from Hurricane Gilbert in 1988. That was more in northeastern Jamaica and just a different part of the island. But we have seen surges in this region get as high as 20 feet if you're unlucky enough to have this come into a bay or a harbor. I run USurge, the International Storm Surge Database, and the highest credible storm surge we have for the Caribbean is a 21-foot storm surge in 1932 in Camagüey, Cuba. And so in general, again, the island areas, we tend to see lower storm surges than the mainland U.S. But if you get the eye wall of a hurricane over a bay or harbor, you can get some really big spikes in storm surge.
Well, we'll take whatever good news we can get at this point. But Dr. Hal, is there anything else you want to add about Melissa?
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to mention, a lot of people were watching live streams and they were surprised to see people out and about. This is going to have a catastrophic impact in Jamaica. We can't let our guard down. Two things come to mind. Number one, I do not think all of Jamaica will experience hurricane force winds. It looks like probably a swath from maybe the southwestern part of the island through the central part of the island. It appears like Kingston and some of these more developed areas may see sustained winds, maybe slightly under hurricane force, which is good news for those more populated areas. The last thing I wanted to mention, though, in island areas, storm surge tends to be quite localized. And so you could have 20 different hurricanes impact an island over, a generation or two, and only one of them produces a big surge in that area. And so that's confusing for people. Again, depending on the shape of these islands, where exactly the track is, conditions, especially with storm surge, can change very locally. And this can happen with landslides and mudslides too. So my message would be to make a buffer there, have more precautions than you think you need. And just because you have not seen catastrophic damage in one location for previous hurricanes does not mean that we could not see catastrophic, especially flood damage from storm surge or landslides, things like that. We could see it this time, even though you haven't seen it in previous hurricanes. And that's a message of precaution for everyone. Like they say, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, hoping we can make it through this without a large loss of life or property. And I just appreciate you bringing me on your show here. The work that you do to educate people around the world is so important. And thank you for all you do.
Awesome. Hurricane Hal, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on.